everyone. Nice to see so many of you here. I'm Bridget Anderson, the President and CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. I would like to acknowledge with gratitude that we are gathered today on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. We are honored to be able to live, work, and play on these lands, and we are committed to working with our local First Nations towards a shared vision to make Vancouver stronger and a region thriving on its true history, partnerships, and business landscapes. Well, I don't need to tell all of you, but British Columbians, we're all headed to the polls in about 4 months or so. Housing, cost of living, economic growth, labor challenges, those are just a few of the topics that are top of mind for all of us. And so today, we are very pleased to be joined by the leader of the BC Conservative Party, John Rustad. John is going to outline his party's vision for British Columbia and how we're going to tackle some of these issues. And then I'm going to sit down with a conversation after. And that's where you all get a chance to be part of this conversation. And how do you do that? You log on to slido.com. Secret password for today is Rustad. You can submit a question, you can upvote a question, but please be part of this conversation. On behalf of the Board of Trade, I would like to thank our generous sponsors and partners for making today's event possible. Thank you to our supporting sponsor, DoorDash, our preferred venue partner, Fairmont Waterfront, our preferred media partner, Business in Vancouver, and this event is presented in partnership with World Trade Center Vancouver. I'd also like to take a moment and thank our pillar partners, these 6 organizations you see on the screen: TELUS, YVR, Air Canada, CN, BCIT, and RBC, and quite honestly, without their support, we wouldn't be able to do the kind of work that we do at the Board of Trade. Well, let's just get to it, shall we? Are we all waiting for this? I am. This will be good. I have the pleasure of introducing our special guest speaker for today. John is the MLA for Nechako Lakes and leader of the BC Conservative Party. He was elected in 2005 and has served as Minister of Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation, and later as the Minister of Forests, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations under the BC Liberals. And you might have heard that back in March, John was acclaimed as the leader of the BC Conservative Party. Please welcome John.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks everybody for coming, and thank you very much to the Board of Trade for having me here to be able to speak. There's so much going on in the province, and it is such a critical time. I know everybody hears that from politicians going into elections, but this one I think is quite different than many others because of what's going on in our province and all the issues that we have. I want to start by recognizing a number of our team members that are here today. I want to start, actually, first of all, recognizing Linda Hepner. Linda was, of course, the previous mayor of Surrey, but she has now just joined us. We just announced today that she'll be our candidate for Surrey Serpentine, so thank you, Linda, for doing that, stepping up to the plate. We have Eleanor, of course, that is running for us also in Surrey, and thank you for joining us, and thanks for being that. We have Paul Ratford. Thank you for being here as well. Brian, it's great to be able to see you. He's one of our other candidates in the Vancouver area. Steve Cooner in Richmond, running for us there. I was going to introduce my Chief of Staff as a candidate because I always like to bug him about that, but Azim Jawani is Chief of Staff for me as well. And then a little bit of musical chairs I see going on. John Cooper, who is running for us in Vancouver as well. And then Mike Morden, former mayor in Maple Ridge, is running for us out there. So thanks everybody for joining us here today to have this little conversation about where we're going as a province. It's an interesting problem that we have in BC. We seem to be doing okay with GDP, a little bit lower than we need to be. You know, we're on 1.5%, but our deficit is running at about $8 billion. We seem to have a huge spending problem, and we have a crisis in just about everything you can think of, whether it's healthcare, whether it is affordability, whether it's housing, whether it is crime, whether it is addictions, whether it's the resource sector, and even our finances with the debt downgrades. And everybody's looking and thinking, like, how did we get to this place? It's really quite remarkable, and it makes a huge difference. And, you know, I talk to many young people around the province, and I tell them, this is why politics matters. Because as a politician, you can't make an economy. But what you can do is you can bring in policies that can improve an economy or bring in policies that hurt an economy. And what we've seen from this NDP government is just that. Policies that have been brought in that have been very destructive for our economy, very destructive to our quality of life. I'm not going to spend the whole time bashing them, but all I can say is when you look at this and you think, how on earth could it have gotten to this point? And unfortunately, they got into power and they've snuck in a whole bunch of stuff that I would say is just pure socialism in terms of their approach. Very big government, big approach to how to do it, with a healthy dose of authoritarianism. Coming in, overriding local governments, coming in and basically just telling people what they can and can't do with their private property. It's pretty scary stuff. And what they have going forward as well is by 2030, they're planning to protect 30% of British Columbia. Now, I think we all love parks. We have more parkland today in British Columbia than any other jurisdiction, certainly in Canada, if not in the world. But they don't want to just have 30% of mountaintops and beautiful scenery. It's 30% of every ecosystem, 30% of our farmland, 30% of our rangeland, 30% of our forest land, 30% of everything that makes British Columbia what it is, and that drives our economic activity in British Columbia. It's a scary thought when you look at it. And it matches with their other thing that they aren't talking about, which was the Lands Act. They came in with a policy and approach to actually pass changes to the Lands Act this spring. Of course, there was some pushback, and they went, oh, we got an election coming. Let's just bury that. We won't talk about that until after the election. I was the Minister for Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation for just over 4 years. I signed 435 agreements with First Nations. We have always done shared decision-making. We've always worked through this process of when permits and proposals come forward, how you adjust them, how you be respectful, how you find ways to deal with accommodation where there is impacts. But ultimately, the province retained the final decision-making on behalf of all British Columbians. And what they're proposing to do is go to what I call joint decision-making, where the final decision-maker will no longer be the province. It will be the province and whatever First Nations are engaged. And if all decision makers don't agree, then nothing happens. And that might be fine if you have one First Nation working with the province, you can work through these issues, but you might have a dozen First Nations that are impacting on a project. And they don't agree with each other. They don't even like each other. They certainly don't even think the other person should even be at the table. How on earth are you ever going to get them all to say yes to a project moving forward? And why this is critical is, for example, in the mining sector, we have 17 mines that are about to be permitted or already permitted. Those 17 mines represent a $38 billion investment in BC, will generate between 20 and 30,000 jobs at an average salary and benefits of about $138,000 a year, and will add over $800 billion to British Columbia's GDP over the life of the mines. This is why it matters. Because if you want to see the economic activity go forward in this province, if we want to see the revenue that we need to be able to deal with healthcare and affordability and tax relief, we need to get our economy going. And we can't get hung up on these issues that we have. There is, Section 35 of the Constitution, Aboriginal rights are important. I recognize that. Reconciliation is a key piece of going forward, but it has to be economic reconciliation. It has to be about adding to the pie, creating the opportunities we have in the province. It can't be about taking from one person to give to another. It also has to be about making sure that we protect private property rights. In Haida Gwaii, we just signed an agreement, the province just signed an agreement to grant title to the entire islands. And quite frankly, they were going to win their court case. But the real issue I have is they have granted title underneath private land. They've granted title underneath infrastructure. What that means is even though it's going to be your private land, Aboriginal law or Indigenous law will apply to your private land. Indigenous governments, the Indigenous government in Haida is going to have a say as to what you can and can't do on your private land because their law will apply. That is what is in this agreement. In addition to that, so take all that and think, okay, maybe that's survivable, but it is pretty significant. But the Silcotin case that came in 2014 laid out very clearly that if Aboriginal title is impacted, compensation is required. The law laid out and said that Aboriginal title means that Indigenous people have the right to benefit from title land. And if that right is impeded or infringed on, which it certainly would be by private land, there would need to be compensation. So you think, well, Haida Gwaii, there's not that much private land there. It's not that much of a big deal. Think of what that compensation would be for downtown Vancouver. Think about what that compensation would be for Victoria or any other community around this province. It would bankrupt us as a province. And this government has just said, go ahead. It's okay to have that liability hanging out there. It's okay to take away the potential of your rights, of your private property. It's pretty scary stuff when you think about it. And as a government, quite frankly, we need to make sure that our government is defending everyone in this province, that they're representing everyone in this province, that they're making the decisions that are in the best interest of all people. So mining is just one thing, quite frankly, that we need to be moving forward with. And all the spin-offs, all the benefits that would come from that as a province. But we still have this enormous opportunity of LNG. We've got a government today that has decided that all future LNG projects have to use electricity for compression. So we had Chevron that looked at it and said, okay, what does this mean? When they did the analysis, a project that would even be smaller than LNG Canada would require 3/4 of Site C's power. So not only would a project have to build, a $6 to $12 billion pipeline, it would have to build a $6 to $10 billion power line and likely have to pay for 3/4 of Site C. Chevron just looked at it and went, math isn't there, I'm out of here. Walked away from $1 billion that they'd already put into the ground. And they're now currently in the process of actually rehabilitating the site, reclaiming the site that they had spent all that money on preparing for an LNG project. It's crazy that this is what we would be doing. We have 3 more natural gas pipelines that are permitted to the coast. We've built one, we've got 3 more that are permitted to the coast. Those permits start expiring in November. They've already had their 5-year extension, they can't apply for another extension. That means if they expire, they will have to go back into the environmental assessment. It'll cost somewhere between $300 million and $1 billion and take a decade. A decade of lost opportunity. A decade of not having that revenue as a province. So as a Conservative government, should we have that on our forming government, the first thing we will do is by order in council, we'll extend those permits by 10 years. They do not need to go back into the environmental assessment. Nothing has changed in terms of those projects. So we'll do that, and then what we will do is we're going to remove that requirement for electricity for compression, and we will make sure that we work with First Nations and designate sites so that we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 LNG projects go forward in this project. Try to get a new one up and running every 3 years so we can have a cycle of construction and a cycle of an industry that needs to be built out to generate, once again, the revenue that we need to deal with these issues and to support a thriving economy. British Columbia has all the potential you could ever want. It has all the resources, it has a well-trained, well-educated population, but it is hopelessly managed. It needs changes in government. We need to get government out of the way. One of the other things that we will do as a government is we're going to go to a process that I call one project, one permit. There's no reason to have to go through 20, 30, 50 permits to go through a project. I mean, we're really going to say that we're going to go through all these permits and process for a project to go forward and then deny a permit for a power line or for a road? Why are we doing this? It's become a make-work project for both the bureaucracy as well as, quite frankly, industry all around. We don't want to change environmental standards, we don't want to dumb things down, but let's get rid of that overlap. Let's make it simple for projects to be able to go forward. We have in, for example, our forest sector today, which is the highest cost producers in the province, or certainly in North America. They can't make a go of it. Even though we've got lumber prices in the 400s, they can't make a go of it because of the cost structure. But it's more than that. They can't access fiber. We've had big wildfires up in Merritt. They've got millions of cubic meters of wood that is being burnt. It has a shelf life of 3 to 5 years. And then it starts falling down and it stops being able to be used. It's been 3 years and they managed to get 2 or 3 permits out the door. That's it. The mills had to shut down because it can't access the fiber, the stumpage cost is too high, the overall cost is too high, and they're saying we're going on permanent curtailment. Same fire happening in Alberta. 3 months later, they've got permits. They're going in logging. It's creating the jobs. They're supporting the families. They're getting the plant area replanted. They're doing the rehabilitation work on the sites. What are we doing as a province? Why is it that we can't get anything done? In my area, BC Timber Sales has about 2 million cubic meters worth of wood a year to be able to put out. It's been 3 years and they put 0 volume out. That's enough wood to run 3 sawmills. And we wonder why we've lost close to half of our forest sector and why the rest are thinking, we're going to leave BC. We can't make it work. The uncertainty on the land base, the cost structure, the hostile government that we have. And you might think, well, those are just forestry jobs. Close to 40% of those forestry jobs are here in the Lower Mainland. They are accountants. They are lawyers. They're corporate offices. They're people, quite frankly, that are getting good wages that are going to be negatively impacted because we cannot get our act together as a province. This needs to change. We need to get to that place where we're one permit for one project. We need to get to a place where we're driving down our costs. We've got to get rid of this archaic stumpage system. We actually have to start thinking about the whole tree and the volume. There's so much that we need to be doing in this province. It's quite remarkable. But all of this, once again, is about getting the economy going so that we can actually get to some of the big issues that we need to. And I'll just touch for a second on, just got to check and see how much time I have. Okay. Want to talk just for a second about crimes and addiction. Because it is a big issue in this province. We need to get away from this process of decriminalization and safe supply. We need to get to a place where we are focused on recovery. Everything from doctor-prescribed treatment to voluntary, short-term and long-term, maybe even to involuntary or long-term care. I mean, there are people who are damaged beyond repair. Doctors are telling me that within 2 to 3 years, with the drugs that are in the streets today, people could have permanent brain damage. They may never be able to recover. And the job, and what this government has done is said, let's keep you addicted. Let's give you drugs. Well, they take those drugs, sell it because it doesn't give them the high they want, and then they buy these dangerous drugs. And of course, those drugs that they sell find their way into the hands of kids in our schools. We need to get to a place as a society where we're addressing recovery so we can move away from this nonsense that's going on in our society. We need to be able to help people actually to get on a path. And if we can do this, it'll actually help clean up our streets. I mean, so many small business people have got these issues of addicts in their doorway, of crime that is happening rampant in our society, and police not having time because they're dealing with all these other issues. This is just common sense. It's what we need to do as a province if we want to be able to take back our streets and actually get a healthy environment again for people to be able to come and prosper. People are afraid to go downtown. I heard just the other day, because of the people doing drugs and the crime that's going on, people are saying, I don't want to go downtown anymore. And we're wondering why our downtown core is hollowing out. Wonder why businesses are shutting down and struggling. We also have to get to a place where there are consequences for crimes. It's a big challenge. So there's changes that we need within the criminal code, within the bail side, but there's changes we need within British Columbia as well, both within the court system and Crown prosecution, so that we can make sure we do what we can. But this rotating door that we have, particularly for prolific violent offenders, has got to come to an end. Every time I see a situation where somebody has been stabbed or shot, and I find out that the person had committed these crimes, in recent past, sometimes even in the same day, and were charged and then released and then go out and commit another crime. This is not what we want as a society. This is not what we should expect as a society. We need to be able to invest and make sure that we can address this so that people can be safe. I'm going to talk for a second about healthcare because it is one of the big components that I think everybody touches on, just about everybody in the province. Healthcare is in a crisis. I think everybody can agree on that. 1 in 5 people in this province don't have a family doctor. We got deferrals or closures of emergency rooms. There's only one jurisdiction in the world that comes close to following what we do in Canada, and that's North Korea. I think we can do better than that. So look at the healthcare models that are being successful in the world, that are actually a lower cost per capita than what we're doing. How is it that they can do it? What is it that they are doing that is achievable? You look, for example, at the European models. It is universal healthcare. It's available to everybody. It's a single payer, but it's delivered by both public and private. Better utilize the professionals that we have. So a doctor I was talking to just last week, he is a specialist in spinal injuries and neck injuries, specialist surgeon. He gets 2 days every 2 months in the facility he's working at. That's it. That's all the time that is being allocated to him. One of his colleagues gets 12 days a month for doing gender-affirming surgeries. We can do better, folks. We can figure out, how to make sure that our professionals have the ability to be able to provide those services that we need in British Columbia. The same thing goes when I look at the three main things that you have to survive. You need a place to live, you need food, and you need energy. And energy is a key component for our success, both for an economy, to be able to be competitive, but also just, to be able to get around, to be able to have a quality of life. And that's why we're going to get rid of the carbon tax. It makes absolutely no sense to be taxing people into poverty to try to change the weather. I mean, David Eby actually stands up there and says, just give us more of your money and we'll fix the weather. I mean, how ludicrous is that? But that's what he's saying when he talks about taking this carbon tax. The analysis I think BC did is that with Clean BC, as the carbon tax keeps going up, by 2030 our GDP will have shrunk to just 0.4%. That is a recipe for nothing but a decline in the quality of life, nothing but a decline in services that we have, and nothing but an increase in taxes. This is why we have to bring this to an end. And not because climate change isn't real, it is real. But there's a better way to address it. We need to be able to adapt. And that comes to the second piece, which is food. We only procure 34% of the food that we consume from British Columbia. 2/3 of our food comes from outside our borders. And so whether it's changing climate or whether it's changing policies, if there's a reduction in food production, we're vulnerable. We're not going to be the first place people send food to. And that leaves us vulnerable. And I think as a government, our primary job should be to look after people in this province, to make sure that we are not vulnerable. So we need to double our food production. But we're the highest cost producers of food in Canada. So we have to drive down that cost. We have to look at every component that goes into food production to drive down the cost so that we can look at doubling. We have to expand out using things like vertical farming. We have to look at every opportunity we can to increase our farming. But with farming, you need to be able to also manage water. So we have to invest in research in terms of our aquifers, the relationship between surface and subsurface, storage, investment in water, so that we have the water available for us, but also for agriculture, so that we can actually expand what we need to look after people. Energy, we need it. We need to bring down the cost structure. It's all about affordability. Food, once again, making sure that it's there and available. And the last piece of that, of course, is also on housing. And it is a big issue in this province. We don't have the supply. I think everybody knows that. So we have to figure out, how do we expand our supply in this province? And I went and talked to a bunch of developers about it, and they've got all kinds of ideas of how we clean up permitting and do all this kind of stuff. But the reality is, we need to triple the number of houses we build every year. We need to figure out how to triple it. And that means we're going to need to drive somewhere between $70 and $100 billion of investment in BC for the next decade. And that's just to meet the housing demand, the pent-up demand that's there, and the growth in our economy and people coming in from outside. But we don't have the workers. We don't have the skills and set to actually do that. People are struggling just to move forward projects. Mind you, nobody really wants to invest and build in BC. I mean, that's a big problem. David Eby's running this whole thing out of the province. But we have to look at our immigration. We're going to have to take control of our own immigration, make sure that we have the skills coming into our province that are pre-qualified, that can get into the province, and that can fill these jobs that we need. I joke and say, if you want to come to British Columbia, the first thing you have to do is build a house for yourself. But it's true. We need to get people to come in to be able to meet that demand. If we don't, we're going to continue to struggle. And if we don't have the housing supply, our price is going to keep going up. We need to stabilize that. Government needs to step up to the table for water and sewer, the key infrastructures that are needed to be able to have densification. That's where government should be investing money. I mean, I was talking with the mayor of Victoria, just at the Victoria Chamber. She said they are still using pipes that are made of clay in many areas in Victoria. There is significant investment that's needed in that infrastructure if we want to see densification. And it can't come like David Evy's approach, which is to mandate it, to override community plans, to override your ability for public input, and just say this is what will happen. It's great to say you can build a fourplex on a city lot. That's great to be able to say that, but where's your parking? Where is the water and sewer? Where is the schools? Where's all the infrastructure that's needed to support it? None of that is there. In other words, what he's doing is just virtue signaling, saying, look, we're going to make some big steps. That's not the way to be able to solve things. That's certainly not the way to be able to get an economy going in this province. So we, as a Conservative Party of British Columbia, we're going to make sure we compete in every riding, in every corner of this province, for every vote that we can, because this is an important election. There's a lot of tough choices ahead. And people are used to rah-rah speeches, and my perspective is very simple. We actually have to be serious. We have to get just back to the basics. We have to bring common sense to what we do in this province. And it can't be about being conservative or liberal or NDP or Green. It just has to be standing for what's right and fighting for the average everyday person and making sure that we can deliver a future for not only for us, but for our kids. When 1 out of 2 kids are thinking about leaving the province, when 1/3 of British Columbia is thinking about leaving the province because they can't build a future, that is just, to me, is unacceptable and a shame. As a government, we need to make sure that we take full advantage of what we have and build that potential so that people can have a future here, so that people can be proud of once again being called British Columbians. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. And I'll just remind everybody you can log on to Slido and you can submit or vote for questions. Let's start with some of your economic policy that you spent a lot of time talking about today, which I think the room really appreciates. We released a report called Benchmarking Greater Vancouver that measured our economic performance against 19 other regions globally. And we have a very strong brand here in Greater Vancouver, but we are really lagging when it comes to economic performance. So some of the pieces that you talked about to get the economy going, I think was probably some good news for this group. But when it comes to things like productivity, there are some certain levers that really are going to require a heck of a lot of effort. So could you talk first maybe like what you might do in your first couple of months? Are you looking at, you talked about the one permit process or project, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think back to the days of Gordon Campbell. He came in and he slashed the corporate tax rate. So can we expect any kind of bold moves if you were to form government in the first few months, for example?
Well, certainly. That is exactly what we need to do. We need to be taking some big steps. But I think, quite frankly, the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out just where is this government spending all that money. We need to be able to be respectful of our taxpayers in terms of the money that they've come in. We've seen the public service grow from 270,000 to close to 400,000. We've seen the budget grow from 53 billion to 89 billion, the largest deficits in history. It's going to take a lot to clean that up. But I want to look at significant tax relief. Getting rid of the carbon tax is only one of it. There is other significant tax relief that I want to be able to put on the table, both for personal taxes as well as some corporate tax restructuring. And I look forward to bringing that out in terms of some announcements in the future.
So just digging into that then, when we look at the deficit, as you talked about, it's significant. The debt has risen considerably. So how would you balance the need to have fiscal prudence and to get the books back to where they need to, and understanding we have historical population growth and a number of areas that need investments. So what is your approach on being fiscally prudent and investing where you need to?
I don't think we're going to be able to go crazy in terms of being fiscally prudent. We do need to make sure we've got investments. There are things that we need in our economy, whether it is a replacement of the Massey Tunnel, whether it is new hospitals and infrastructure that needs to be put in, whether it's dealing with the portable issues in Surrey. There are things that need to get done, and we're going to need to be able to make those critical investments. But what we need to look at is how do we curb that spending, that out-of-control spending, and make sure that what we're doing is strategic, that's needed, while at the same time growing the economy and bringing that spending back in line with what is affordable in British Columbia.
So where are some of those opportunities to curb the spending then?
One of it certainly would be with what government is doing on the environment side. This Clean BC stuff that they're doing across the province, I look at that and I think if you're going to get rid of the carbon tax, which is a $3.5 billion hit on an annual basis, we need to be looking at the spending that's offsetting that. And we need to look at how we bring that in line and control so that we can give that tax relief to people in British Columbia.
Okay, so you're talking about removing the carbon tax entirely. I think we both remember back in 2008 when it was revenue neutral. So you're talking about eliminating it entirely.
That's correct.
And on climate change, then?
Just on that issue, if the carbon tax continues to grow at the rate it's growing, by 2030, the average family of four in British Columbia will have spent a total of close to $27,000 on carbon tax. And I'm sorry, that's just not affordable, especially when people are struggling to put food on the table.
It provides a lot of revenue for government at times where you're talking about investment. So what other areas then can you look at to increase revenue?
Well, certainly when you look at what we need to do for things like mining, for LNG, for forestry, getting our economy, getting our resource economy back up and running. But I think we need to be looking at strategically as well, as you say, in terms of productivity. I mean, I heard some numbers back from a few years ago now. In the United States, excluding real estate, they invest about $55,000 per company, per worker, and through their company and investments, what they do. In Europe, it's around $33,000. In Canada, it's around $9,000. Like, we need to change that. We need to come an environment, a place where people want to invest because they can expect a return, they can expect stability, they can expect a government that is not going to be changing the landscape on a continuous basis. We need to drive that kind of environment. It's not going to happen overnight, but that's where we need to get to be able to solve productivity and get our GDP growing again to improve that quality of life.
So given the regulatory barriers that exist in this province, probably a lot of welcome news that you were talking about, one permit per project, how realistic is that to be able to attain that?
It's very realistic. I once sat down with a group of First Nation leaders and I was talking about how do we help you get through all these permits that we give you? Because it takes so long. You get these great big stacks of permits on your desk every week. You've got to go through all this and what do we need to do? Do we need to invest in staff? And one of the First Nation leaders looked at us and said, well, we don't ask you to issue those permits, you guys do them.
So that's going to
take
obvious. I mean, but that takes a lot of interministerial coordination and breaking down a lot of the structure that exists now.
It's across many pieces of legislation. There needs to be cleanup in those legislation and in terms of process. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. It's actually going to take a lot within the legislature. You can't just wave a wand and do it because these are embedded in layers upon layers of legislation. But it is, it's the work that has to be done, and so we'll do it.
Can you talk to us a little bit about your vision when it comes to the green economy? I mean, you did talk about eliminating the carbon tax. You said a few minutes ago, that you said climate change is real. You are quoted as, the science around human causes of climate change is, quote, a theory and it's not proven, end quote. So have you changed your views on this? And also a corollary to that, what is your vision for a green economy for British Columbia? Because a lot of British Columbia's economic growth or an economic growth plan over the last decade or so has been around the green economy.
Sure. So first of all, climate change is real. Okay, the question to the degree of impact by human activity, scientists can debate that, and the scientists are debating that. But when I think about our green economy, or a province in general, 84% of the energy we consume is hydrocarbons. Only 16% is electricity. And when Site C comes on board, that'll be about 18%. So if we want to have heat pumps, for example, in every home and every business in the province, you're going to need to build the equivalent of 6 or 7 more Site C dams. That's not going to happen. We're not going to likely build another dam in British Columbia. So where's that power going to come from? If we're talking about electric vehicles, the amount of electricity required for that is enormous. If all of our transportation, that's all of our boats and trains and planes and personal vehicles, were to be electric, we would need to triple the amount of electricity we produce in the province. So where's that going to come from? What we need to do is we actually need to be honest with people in British Columbia about our energy consumption, about where our energy can come from, and say, what are the sources? What are the options? I mean, I'm pretty sure people's not going to support the idea of coal. They seem to want to move away from natural gas in terms of heat pumps, so maybe we're not going to be able to use natural gas. So where is that going to come from? Solar and wind can be part of the mix. They're important pieces that can be added, but they're not baseload. They're additive too. And that means, quite frankly, we need to have an honest conversation about other sources like nuclear. And it's a conversation that we have to have in the province if we want to see us move away from using hydrocarbons.
There has been a long-term ban, though, on nuclear.
Yes, there has.
That would be a significant shift.
But I'm not proposing that we just go out and build nuclear plants. We need to have this honest conversation with people in the province. What does it mean? What does it mean to your electricity rates? What does it mean in terms of competitiveness in our economy? How should this be done? What's the path we want to go on? And if need be, we may even put a question directly to the people. I mean, I don't have no problem with doing more direct democracy.
I think the big question on many of these people's minds is around the merger. So let's just get to a couple of questions on that, and then we'll get to Slido. What happened, and why did it not come to fruition?
So before the talks had even started between the two parties, which were relatively recent, I mean, we had tried before to have conversations and rebuff. Before those talks, we did some polling. And what the polling showed is that a combined party of the Conservative Party of British Columbia and the BC United, under a Conservative banner, would have a 6-point lead over the NDP. A combined party of the Conservative Party of British Columbia and the BC United under a BC United banner, the NDP would have a 20-point lead. The votes do not transfer like you would think it would be between the two parties. And so we looked at it and thought the proposal coming forward would all but assure that the NDP would be a government.
Is there not a risk of vote splitting, though, in the center-right?
There is some risk, but ultimately that's up to the voters in British Columbia. And I think it was put best when I saw an individual tweet this out that said, if the two parties can't come together, it's going to be up to the voters. And so ultimately, I've said this in many speeches, if you're worried about vote splitting, don't vote for the third place party, whoever that may be. If that's us, don't vote for us. If that's the BC United, don't vote for them, and you won't have a split vote.
There is another pathway, though, and we saw it 2017, I believe, a supply agreement between the NDP and the Greens. Is that an option that you would consider with the BC Liberals?
Certainly post-election, I can promise you this. These radical policies of this NDP government need to come to an end. And so if we're in a situation where you have a minority NDP government and there's an opportunity to take them down, I will look at the very first opportunity possible. I'll work with whoever might be in the legislature to be able to do that, to take a NDP government down, or to form a government, should we have the ability to be able to do that. What's going on with this government in British Columbia today, I just find completely unacceptable. What's going on in our schools, what's going on with anti-Semitism in our society, the hate that is festering, all of that should and needs to come to an end.
Okay, let's get to Slido, because I know lots of people have questions here. James is talking about, well, very similar question to what I asked earlier around the top marginal income tax rate. Eleanor Sturko, here in the front row, made a post suggesting cutting that to boost competitiveness, which is now sitting at 53.5%. So where do you stand on this? What are you thinking?
We are going to look at everything possible to reduce the tax burden on individuals and on companies. We need to make sure that we're as competitive as possible. So we think there is some tax room, and we look forward to being able to announce where we're able to make those changes in the future.
Okay. Speculation tax, and I think we haven't really dug into housing too much. I will in a couple of minutes, but the question here, which is now the second one down to the team at the back. Oh, now it's the first. There we go. That was quick. So what is your thought on the speculation tax?
This government has done this when it comes to housing. It's their problem. Mm-hmm. Whether it's foreign buyers, whether it is speculators, whether it is vacant properties, whether it is short-term rentals. They've looked at everything and said, that's the problem. We're going to solve housing. That doesn't solve housing. What you need to do is you need to create the incentives to get houses built in this province by the private sector, not by government and not by taxing people.
What's your approach in working with the federal government when it comes to housing? I mean, the NDP government has been speaking to Ottawa a lot. There's been a lot of Ottawa support. There could be changes in Ottawa in a year or so from now, but how much will you be relying on federal funding to try and help solve this problem?
Certainly one of the first places I would be asking the federal government to do is to step up to the plate and support putting infrastructure money towards communities to deal with water and sewer. And I would hope that the federal government would be able to step up to the plate and recognize that is a key piece, both in driving down the costs in terms of development charges, but also enabling the ability for permitting and process to go through. And so that would be certainly an ask I have of the federal government. And like I said, immigration is a big issue. I think British Columbia needs to take on its own immigration, similar to Quebec, so that we can deal with that. So that's something I'll want to work on with the federal government as well.
How do you envision those talks going, though? I mean, the federal government is the one that has set the population growth targets, and provinces and municipalities are trying to address that. But certainly, you know, in British Columbia, we've had historical population growth. So how do you envision being able to work through that with the federal government?
Quebec can do it. Why can't British Columbia?
Quebec is quite a bit different from the other provinces.
It may be, but the precedent is there. And if we can't, you know, wrestle Ottawa into giving us the full ability that Quebec has, what we'll do is look at moving as much of immigration as we can through the provincial nominee program so that we have a say in terms of the skill sets that we need. But it's more than just that. You have to actually work outside of our borders with people that would like to come to this province and make sure that they meet the qualifications, make sure they have the skill sets. You know, when you've got, you know, a family, 2 doctors, husband and wife team that moved from India, and it takes 4 years or thereabouts to be able to qualify to be able to practice in British Columbia. So one person, the wife actually started the process, going through that process. The husband took a menial job and then would go back to India for 6 months of the year to do surgeries.
I think a lot of people are aware of those stories.
And then after 4 years, it's now the husband's turn. So you've taken somebody that could be operating in British Columbia right away, and it's taken 8 years before that individual is able and eligible to be supporting our healthcare system. So
are you suggesting slowing population, I guess, targets for British Columbia? Are you talking about that and also foreign credentialing? And
we need to make sure that we are, when we're bringing people into British Columbia, we're bringing in the skill sets that we need that can come directly in and start working in British Columbia to build what we need in our economy. And we obviously need growth. We are short of doctors, we're short of nurses, we're short of teachers, we're short of truck drivers, we're short of electricians, we're short of everything. So we do need population growth, but we need to make sure that it comes in, that it's going to be able to help build out the economy, and that it's not going to be just coming in and creating another layer of burden because they are frustrated and can't actually get in and start working. I mean, I think people that come to this country for the same reason that most people did. They are looking for a better future for them and for their children and their grandchildren. And as a British Columbia, that is what we need to be able to try to fight to achieve.
You may be aware that the BC Liberals made an announcement or two today as well, and so Kevin Falcon has promised to balance the budget in his first term. Do you agree with that timeline? Would you be working towards that? I mean, having just a few minutes ago talked about that you need to take a look at what the province's finances are like right now.
Well, first of all, I think our deficit's going to be much larger than what they're projecting. They've overestimated our GDP growth. They've overestimated the resource revenue. They've overestimated housing starts and the revenue from that. Our deficit's going to be larger. And I think, quite frankly, shaving off 10% of the budget in that short a period of time is unrealistic. Not if we want to make the strategic investments we need to. We need to be able to make sure that we're measured, that we are fiscally responsible, but that we can deal with issues, for example, tax relief that's needed.
Well, it doesn't give you, I'll let you drink a little bit of water there, so I'll prattle on for a minute. But it doesn't give you the wiggle room that has been afforded to other new governments coming in British Columbia in the last 15, 20 years or so. Is that a concern that you will be overpromising given where the finances could be?
I have no problem with the idea of being bold in terms of what we need to do for British Columbians. We need to make sure that we put British Columbians first in what we do, and then work very hard to make sure that we bring in line with what's needed. So I plan to be very aggressive.
Another question about costs, and this didn't come from my team, but thank you, Andrew, because we did produce a report on the costs that have been imposed on business, government-imposed costs over a 4-year period, $6.5 billion, and that includes things like the EHT, which the threshold has been increased somewhat, paid sick days, a number of other costs, especially for small and medium businesses, which have really been struggling with affordability. So what are some of those initiatives that you would say to those small and medium business owners particularly?
Hope is on the way, and I look forward to rolling out those pieces as part of our platform.
Would you consider eliminating the EHT entirely?
So that's about a $2.2 to $2.4 billion hit, depending on where things are at. And so I would certainly want to look at all the tax measures that are potentially in front of us to make sure that we can make the best use of the room that we are hoping to have to be able to provide tax relief for people in British Columbia.
Speaking of healthcare, you touched on mental health and addiction, which I think is a very important topic, especially here in the downtown core, where we have seen a lot of the impacts of decriminalization, homelessness, mental health, et cetera. You mentioned possible involuntary rehab or involuntary recovery, if you want to call it that, sure. Or it's involuntary, but it's, locking people up against their will, quite frankly. And so how would you navigate that space, and would you consider legal measures to do so?
So this is a very touchy subject, obviously, and we're certainly not going to be running around, rounding people up and putting them into treatment. We have to be a much more compassionate society than that. But where you have somebody, for example, who overdoses and is brought back to life, clearly, if you were to look at it from a mental health perspective, they're at risk of harming themselves. And in that situation, they should be able to receive treatment so that you can actually be compassionate about it, not being put back out on the street and hours later or days later coming back in again, overdosing. I think there's another component that we need to look at too, and there was a family that I talked to. They had a 14-year-old and 11-year-old who were addicted, and they wanted to be able to do the best they could for their kids. So they had to take out a second mortgage and send them to involuntary care, to treatment. Fortunately, they're both on a good path. First one's graduated and off going to university. The second one will be graduating this year. Why would we have to send people out of province to be able to receive that kind of treatment? We need to be able to have options for people in British Columbia.
The other piece of that puzzle is around judicial reform. When we look at some of what is happening to small and medium businesses, particularly in the downtown core, and some of the vandalism and some of the issues, whether they've been random attacks or that kind of thing, how are you suggesting that judicial reform be dealt with? I mean, some of it lies with the federal government, some of it is obviously in British Columbia jurisdiction, but what are your views on that?
It's a big issue, very big issue. I mean, we need changes federally, and I don't mean just in government. We need changes to bail reform in terms of that process. We need changes to the criminal code. We have to end this rotating door in British Columbia and across the country in terms of these people. There needs also to be work that has to be done to make our court systems more efficient than what they are. It takes too long to get through the process of courts. We probably need to add judges. We certainly need to be working with Crown prosecution to make sure that we can bring cases forward. We need to look at, for example, there's a couple of issues that just take forever going through the court system. How can we try to move those out of the court system, or is there a way that we can make it more efficient so that it's not just locking up time within the court system? So there's a bunch of things that need to be looked at if we want to get to a place where there can be consequences for people committing crimes.
Let's see, what else have we got here? A lot of questions are really around affordability. So the two top questions there, I think one is more about students and post-secondary institutions, but the other one I think is even minimum wage, and both of them are really linked to affordability. Affordability is an enormous problem in this province, not just for students and young people. So maybe we can tackle those two. For students first, are you thinking about some initiatives, on that file to really help students, and how would you go about that?
I mean, there needs to be strategic investments done on our universities for student housing, for example. And that's something that is desperately needed. Many of the students that are in, take up housing outside of the university. And that's fine to be able to do that, but we need to be able to create those options. And that, I do not believe that government should be building that. I think that's a role that the private sector can build, and we need to be able to provide support for that to be built out. There's other components we need to be looking at, but on affordability just in general with wages and wage growth, it's a very tricky situation. You've got many businesses that can't afford the minimum wage increases, and that ultimately drives down employment and drives up costs, and yet you have many other people that can't ever afford to buy a house.
Would you consider freezing minimum wage?
I actually think we should be looking at minimum wage not from a perspective of of inflation, but minimum wage from a perspective of the average wage. So if the average wage in BC is going up, minimum wage should keep pace. It shouldn't just automatically go up because of inflation.
I can't believe it, but we're almost out of time. So a couple of last questions. And one really is about the party in general, the BC Conservative Party. I think the vision that you have is to have a big tent party. You have a lot of folks in that tent that, a lot of different views on social issues particularly, that maybe some of the electorate is really wondering how you're going to navigate and keep that as a cohesive unit. So, what would you say to these people in the room about the values that the BC Conservatives hold?
Well, it's interesting. We have a provincial NDP, former NDP MLA running for us in Nanaimo. We have federal Liberals running for us. We have federal Conservatives running for us. We are a big tent party. We've got three Indigenous people running for us as a party. We've got people from right across the spectrum that are part of who we are as a party. And there's going to be differences, and that's okay. That's okay to have that. One of the things I'm going to be asking all of our candidates to do on day one of the election is actually to take a pledge that their number one priority will always be their riding, speaking on behalf of their riding, and voting on behalf of the riding, being able to have free votes. Now, obviously, we've got to be able to bring this together to get things done in the province and on a bigger scale and vision. But I think it's long past time that MLAs are there to fight for their riding, not there to parrot a party position, which is what we've seen from historic parties in British Columbia.
So we have 4 months into the election, thereabouts. What can we expect from the BC Conservatives over the summer? How many more candidates? It seems like it's been one a day or a couple a day. What can we expect over the next 4 months?
Well, we're going to run, of course, 93 candidates. We're over 70 now, I think 71, 72 candidates as a party. We've got another 18 or so, I think, that are in the works, as either through the vetting process or open nominations that are going on. So we will not have a problem with filling our 93 candidates. Over the course of the summer, we're going to be out engaging with people right across the province. Our candidates are going to be building up their teams. They'll be engaging with people in their ridings. Of course, we'll be doing fundraisers. Everybody wants to donate. Go to conservativebc.ca. Just joking. Well, actually, I'm not joking. Sorry.
We knew that you weren't.
But no, we're going to be out engaging, doing everything we can to talk to people and continue to build this as a grassroots movement. That's been the beauty of what we have done as the Conservative Party, is it has been at that grassroots level. People coming in, joining our party every day, not because we've got a membership drive, because they want to be part, first of all, of making history, but also of bringing common sense back to British Columbia.
John, I don't think a year ago that we would all be sitting here and thinking that the next election was going to be as interesting as it is. So thank you so much for making time to speak to all of us and to lay out your vision. And it will be a very interesting 4 months ahead. Thank you so much.
It certainly will be. Thank you very much.